July 30th, 1945, nearly midnight. The USS Indianapolis, a heavy cruiser of the United States Navy, moves through the Philippine Sea. The ship's mission is nearly complete. Days ago, the Indianapolis delivered its cargo to Tinian Island. The cargo was secret, the cargo was vital. The cargo would change the course of the war. The crew is tired. The crew has endured months of naval warfare in the Pacific. The crew has seen combat. The crew has survived danger. Now the Indianapolis is heading home. The night is dark, the ocean is vast. The Indianapolis moves slowly through the darkness, unaware of what is approaching. Then, without warning, explosion. A Japanese submarine has attacked. 2 torpedoes have found their mark. The first torpedo hits the forward engine room. The second torpedo hits the aft engine room. The USS Indianapolis, one of the United States Navy's most formidable warships, is dying. The ship begins to sink. Not slowly, but rapidly. Within minutes. 12 minutes. That is all the time the Indianapolis has before it disappears beneath the waves. Nearly 200 sailors scramble to abandon ship. Some jump into the water. Some grab makeshift rafts. Some cling to debris. Some never make it out. The Indianapolis sinks gone. A massive warship reduced to wreckage floating on the surface. But the disaster is not over. The sinking is not the end of the tragedy. The real nightmare is just beginning. Nearly 900 sailors are in the water. They will spend the next 4 days floating in the Pacific Ocean. 4 days of exposure, 4 days of starvation, 4 days of dehydration, 4 days of madness. Over the next 4 days, nearly 600 sailors will die. Not from drowning, not from the sinking itself, but from exposure, from dehydration, from drinking salt water, from despair, from something else in the water. This is the story of the USS Indianapolis, one of the worst naval disasters in American history. But it is not the story you think you know. There are questions about what happened, questions about the sinking, questions about the rescue, questions about responsibility. This is the story of the USS Indianapolis. But it is a story of far greater complexity than the public knows. To grasp the USS Indianapolis tragedy, one must understand the context of the Pacific War in July 1945. By July 1945, the Pacific War is nearly over. The United States has island-hopped across the Pacific. The United States has defeated Japanese forces in countless battles. The Japanese homeland is within reach of American bomber forces. Japan is losing. Everyone knows this. Japan's navy has been destroyed. Japan's air force has been decimated. Japan's military capability is collapsing. But Japan is not surrendering. Japan is preparing for invasion. Japanese military leadership is determined to fight to the last man. Japanese civilian population is being prepared to fight American invasion. American military leadership estimates that an invasion of the Japanese mainland will be extraordinarily costly. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of American casualties. Estimates suggest millions of Japanese casualties. The invasion is planned for November 1945. The invasion will be the largest amphibious operation in military history. But there is an alternative, a secret alternative, a weapon that might end the war without invasion: the atomic bomb. The United States has developed an atomic bomb. The bomb has been tested in the New Mexico desert. The bomb is ready for use. The bomb represents the future of warfare. The bomb represents a weapon of unprecedented destructive power. The bomb represents a way to end the war without invasion. A special naval task has been assigned. Deliver the atomic bomb components to Tinian Island. Tinian Island is a forward American air base in the Pacific. From Tinian Island, B-29 bombers will fly to Japan. From Tinian Island, the atomic bomb will be launched against Japan. The USS Indianapolis is assigned this task. The Indianapolis is a heavy cruiser. The Indianapolis is fast. The Indianapolis is well armed. The Indianapolis is trusted with the most secret cargo of the war. On July 16, 1945, the Indianapolis departs from San Francisco. The ship carries specialized cargo. The cargo is locked in the captain's cabin. The cargo is under special guard. The cargo is the atomic bomb. The captain of the Indianapolis is Captain Charles B. McVay III. McVay is an experienced naval officer. McVay has served with distinction. McVay commands the respect of his crew. The voyage from San Francisco to Tinian Island takes 10 days. The Indianapolis travels through the Pacific. The ship passes through areas where Japanese submarines might be operating. But the war is almost over. Most Japanese naval forces have been destroyed. The risk seems minimal. On July 26, 1945, the Indianapolis arrives at Tinian Island. The special cargo is delivered. The atomic bomb components are unloaded. The Indianapolis is directed to proceed to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. Leyte Gulf is where the fleet is stationed. The Indianapolis will rejoin the fleet. The Indianapolis will undergo maintenance and replenishment. On July 28, 1945, the Indianapolis departs from Tinian Island. The ship heads toward Leyte Gulf. The journey will take several days. The ship travels through the Philippine Sea. The ship is not escorted. No other ships are sailing with the Indianapolis. The Indianapolis is traveling alone. This is the context. The war is nearly over. Japan is losing. An invasion is planned for November. An atomic bomb has been delivered. The Indianapolis is returning to fleet. The ship is traveling alone. The risk seems minimal. The voyage seems routine. The USS Indianapolis is sailing into history. But neither Captain McVay nor the crew knows what is approaching. The ship is heading toward disaster. The first anomaly begins with the absence of something. The absence of a warning. The absence of detection. The absence of preparation. At 12:14 a.m. on July 30th, the USS Indianapolis is hit by 2 torpedoes. The attack comes without warning. There is no sonar contact. There is no visual sighting. There is no alert. The Japanese submarine I-58 has attacked. The submarine had been following the Indianapolis for hours. But the Indianapolis crew did not detect the submarine. The submarine had not been seen. The submarine had not been heard. This is the first anomaly. The Indianapolis was traveling alone, unescorted, with no protection against submarine attack, in waters where Japanese submarines were known to operate. Why was the Indianapolis traveling without escort? Naval procedure typically required escort ships for heavy cruisers in combat zones. The Indianapolis was in a combat zone. Japanese submarines were known to be operating in the Philippine Sea. Yet the Indianapolis traveled without escort. The second anomaly, the distress call. After the Indianapolis was hit, the ship's radio operators attempted to send a distress signal. But the claim is made that no distress call was successfully transmitted. Why was no distress call sent? Some sources claim the radio equipment was damaged by the first torpedo. Some sources claim the water damage prevented radio transmission. Some sources claim Captain McVay ordered radio silence to avoid revealing the ship's position. The truth is unclear. Some historical accounts claim a distress message was sent but never received. Some accounts claim no message was sent at all. This communications failure had catastrophic consequences. The sinking of the Indianapolis was not immediately reported to the Navy. The fleet did not know the Indianapolis was missing. The fleet did not know nearly 900 sailors were in the ocean. The fleet did not know a rescue was needed. The third anomaly, the time before rescue. The Indianapolis sank on July 30th, 1945. The survivors were not rescued until August 2nd, 1945. Nearly 4 days passed between sinking and rescue. 4 days in the ocean is extraordinarily long. In this time, sailors die from dehydration, exposure, drinking salt water, causing hallucinations and madness, hypothermia, despair, starvation. In 4 days, over 600 sailors died. Of the nearly 900 sailors who entered the water, only about 300 survived. The fourth anomaly, the shark attacks. Within hours of the sinking, sailors began reporting shark attacks. Great white sharks in the Philippine Sea targeted the wounded and weakened sailors. Sharks attacked throughout the first night and into the second day. Estimates suggest 20 to 50 sailors were killed by sharks, but the accounts vary. Some survivors report more attacks. Some survivors report seeing more sharks. Some accounts became sensationalized in post-war telling. The presence of sharks turned survival in the ocean into a nightmare. Sailors could not relax. Sailors could not sleep. Sailors remained on alert for shark attacks throughout the ordeal. The fifth anomaly, the rescue method. When the Indianapolis survivors were finally spotted, the rescue was conducted by a single ship, the USS Doyle. The USS Doyle was a small destroyer escort. The USS Doyle was not equipped for large-scale rescue operations. The USS Doyle was not expecting to perform a rescue. How were the survivors found? The USS Doyle spotted an oil slick and debris in the water. The debris was from the Indianapolis. The oil slick marked where nearly 900 sailors were floating. The USS Doyle immediately began rescue operations. But the USS Doyle could only rescue sailors within reach. The USS Doyle's boats could only save a limited number. Other sailors drifting at distance from the rescue point were not found. The sixth anomaly, the survival rate. Of the approximately 196 crew members aboard the Indianapolis, only 317 survived. That is a survival rate of 26%. That is a death rate of 74%. This is one of the worst naval disasters in American history. More American sailors died on the Indianapolis than in the entire Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, 177 compared to 1102. These anomalies accumulate, unescorted voyage in hostile waters. No distress signal sent or received. 4-day delay before rescue. Shark attacks during the ordeal. Limited rescue operation, massive death toll. These anomalies suggest that the sinking was not simply bad luck. These anomalies suggest that multiple failures contributed to the death toll. What really happened to the USS Indianapolis? Examining why the USS Indianapolis disaster occurred requires analyzing multiple contributing factors. The unescorted voyage, naval protocol and decision-making. Standard naval procedure in July 1945 required escort ships for heavy cruisers traveling through areas where enemy submarines were operating. The USS Indianapolis was not assigned an escort. Why? Multiple factors contributed. 1. The war was nearly over. Japanese naval forces had been largely destroyed. The threat seemed minimal. 2. Escort ships were assigned to other operations. The Indianapolis was considered non-essential. 3. Speed was prioritized. The Indianapolis could travel at 32+ knots. The ship could outrun submarines. 4. The voyage was considered routine. The high-priority cargo was known only to senior officers. Most officers considered it a normal transit. But this decision proved catastrophic. The Japanese submarine I-58 was operating in the Philippine Sea. The I-58 was specifically hunting for American warships. The I-58 had already achieved 3 successful attacks in the previous week. The absence of escort meant no defense against submarine attack. The absence of escort meant no ships to assist in rescue. The absence of escort meant the Indianapolis was vulnerable and isolated. The torpedo hit and sinking. The I-58 fired 2 Type 95 long-lance torpedoes at the Indianapolis. Both torpedoes found their mark. The first torpedo hit the forward engine room. The second torpedo hit the aft engine room. The Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser, not a battleship. The ship was not designed to absorb the kind of damage inflicted by 2 heavy torpedoes. The damage was catastrophic. The ship began flooding immediately. The ship listed rapidly. The ship broke apart internally. The ship sank in 12 minutes. 12 minutes is an extraordinarily short time for a large naval vessel to sink. The rapid sinking meant many sailors could not abandon ship. The rapid sinking meant many sailors went down with the ship. The missing distress call, communications failure or deliberate decision. After the initial torpedo impact, the ship's radio operators attempted to send a distress signal. The signal never reached Navy command. Why? Theory 1. The first torpedo damaged the radio transmitter. The radio equipment was disabled by the explosion. The operator could not send the message. Theory 2. Water damage from the flooding disabled communications. As water poured into the ship, electrical systems failed. Radio transmission became impossible. Theory 3. Captain McVay ordered radio silence. Believing the ship's position was secret, McVay ordered the radio not to transmit. The silence meant no warning was sent. Historical records support Theory 1 or 2 more than Theory 3. The radio room was near the torpedo impact. The explosion would have damaged communications equipment. Water was flooding the compartment. Electrical power was failing. But the result was the same. No distress signal was transmitted. The Navy did not know the Indianapolis was in trouble. The Navy did not know the ship had sunk. The Navy did not know nearly 900 sailors were in the water. The rescue delay. Why 4 days? The Indianapolis sank on July 30th, 1945 at 12:14 a.m. The survivors were not rescued until August 2nd, 1945. Nearly 76 hours passed before rescue operations began. Why was the delay so long? The Indianapolis had not filed a distress report. The Navy did not know the ship was missing. The Indianapolis was not expected to arrive at Leyte Gulf until August 3rd. The Navy did not realize the ship was overdue until after that date. When was the ship's absence finally noticed? The USS Indianapolis was scheduled to arrive at Leyte Gulf on August 3rd. When the ship did not arrive, the Navy began investigating. The Navy found no record of the ship's location. The Navy realized the Indianapolis was missing. The Navy launched search operations. By this time, 76 hours had passed. 76 hours in the ocean is 3 days. 3 days without fresh water, 3 days without food, 3 days exposed to sun, wind, and cold. 3 days exposed to shark attacks. The USS Doyle, a destroyer escort, was the ship that discovered the survivors. The USS Doyle spotted oil and debris on the surface. The USS Doyle began rescue operations immediately. But the USS Doyle could only rescue survivors in a limited area. Survivors spread over a wide area of ocean could not all be reached. Survivors drifting at distance had to be left behind. Some survivors were never found. Additional ships arrived to assist: the USS Bassett, the USS Ringness, the USS Cecil J. Doyle, other vessels. But by this time, many sailors had already died. The 4-day ordeal had taken its toll. Dehydration had weakened survivors. Exposure had damaged bodies. Some survivors were comatose when rescued. Some were hallucinating, some had gone mad. Shark attacks began within hours of the sinking. Sailors reported sharks circling the groups. Sailors reported being bitten. Sailors reported seeing shipmates attacked and dragged underwater. Great white sharks were likely responsible. Great white sharks inhabit the Philippine Sea. Great white sharks are large predators. Great white sharks are attracted to blood and disturbance in the water. Estimates of shark-caused deaths vary. Official estimate, 12 sharks, responsible for 10-15 deaths. Survivor accounts, 20-50 sailors killed by sharks. Some accounts, dozens of attacks throughout the ordeal. The truth likely falls between the official estimate and the highest survivor accounts. Sharks probably were responsible for 20-30 deaths. But the psychological impact was greater than the actual death toll. The fear of shark attacks kept sailors awake. The fear prevented sailors from resting or relaxing. The fear added to the terror of the ordeal. Of approximately 1,196 crew members, only 317 survived. Survival rate, 26.5%. Death rate, 73.5%. Deaths by cause: shark attacks, 20-30 sailors. Drowning during sinking, 150-plus sailors. Dehydration, saltwater poisoning, 200-plus sailors. Exposure to hypothermia, 150-plus sailors. Despair suicide, 50-plus sailors. Other causes, 100-plus sailors. The Indianapolis had an enormously high death rate compared to other naval disasters. Even compared to the Titanic, survival rate 30%. The Indianapolis had worse survival rate, 26.5%. After the disaster, a naval court-martial was convened. Captain Charles B. McVay III, the Indianapolis commander, was court-martialed. Charges against Captain McVay: 1. Negligence in command, resulted in acquittal. 2. Hazarding the ship by failing to order evasive maneuvers or report the torpedo damage in time, resulted in conviction. Captain McVay was found guilty of hazarding the ship. The court ruled that McVay should have ordered evasive maneuvers or zigzagging. The court ruled that McVay failed to properly assess the ship's damage and order abandonment quickly enough. The sentence, loss of 1 month's pay and censure. This sentence proved controversial. Why was the sentence light? The court recognized that McVay had limited options. The court recognized that the torpedo attack was swift and devastating. The court recognized that the ship's rapid sinking limited response options. But McVay was still convicted. The investigation conclusion: multiple failures created the disaster. The investigation into the Indianapolis sinking revealed multiple contributing factors. 1. Unescorted voyage. The ship should have had escort in hostile waters. 2. Communications failure. The distress signal was not transmitted, for technical reasons. 3. Delayed rescue. The Navy did not know the ship was missing for over 3 days. 4. Single ship rescue. The rescue was conducted by limited assets with limited reach. 5. Shark attacks. Predictable predators in the region increased death toll. 6. Naval command failure. The fleet command did not track the Indianapolis's progress. 7. Command decision controversy. The decision to proceed without escort proved catastrophic. No single factor caused the disaster. Multiple failures cascaded together. An unescorted ship traveling through hostile waters, with active enemy submarines, with no protection, with communications that failed, with rescue delayed by 3 days, with rescue conducted by limited assets. The result? Over 600 sailors dead, a naval disaster. A tragedy that shaped naval procedures for decades to come. However, reconsider before accepting that the USS Indianapolis disaster resulted primarily from command failure. Reconsider before concluding that Captain McVay bears primary responsibility. Reflect before assuming that better decisions would have prevented the tragedy. Numerous naval historians and officers argue the Indianapolis disaster deserves more contextualized assessment. Their perspectives merit examination. Proponents observe that by July 1945, Japan's military capability was nearly exhausted. The Japanese Navy had been decimated. The Japanese Air Force had been destroyed. Japanese submarine operations were severely constrained. In this context, the assessment that the threat was minimal was not unreasonable. The Indianapolis could travel at 32+ knots. This speed was sufficient to outrun virtually any submarine. Defenders contend In July 1945, when the war was ending, assessing the threat as minimal was a reasonable military judgment. Advocates note that escort ships were in short supply. Every escort ship was assigned to operations considered more critical. The Indianapolis cargo, while important, was not perceived as requiring escort protection. The Indianapolis itself was valuable enough to defend. The Navy faced competing priorities: protecting invasion fleets, escorting carrier task forces, defending against kamikaze attacks, supporting ongoing amphibious operations. Defenders contend allocating every available escort ship to the Indianapolis would have required withdrawing ships from other critical operations. Proponents emphasize that Captain Charles B. McVay III was a distinguished naval officer. McVay had served with honor throughout the war. McVay had commanded warships successfully. McVay was trusted by the Navy with critical missions. McVay's command of the Indianapolis had been successful. The ship's crew respected McVay. The crew considered McVay a capable leader. When the attack came, McVay's response was appropriate. The captain attempted to keep the ship afloat. The captain ordered damage control. The captain ordered the crew to abandon ship. The captain remained with the ship until the end. Defenders contend Captain McVay did everything a competent commander could do when faced with a devastating torpedo attack. Advocates point out that the Japanese submarine I-58's attack was executed with extraordinary efficiency. 2 torpedoes fired. Both torpedoes found their mark. The ship sank in 12 minutes. An attack of this magnitude and speed offers minimal response options. The captain cannot steer away from an already fired torpedo. The captain cannot order evasive action after being hit. The damage control options are limited when the ship is flooding catastrophically. The sinking in 12 minutes meant many sailors had no time to abandon ship. Many compartments flooded before evacuation possible. The ship's structural integrity failed rapidly. The damage was beyond repair or mitigation. Defenders contend the speed of the attack and sinking made heroic response impossible. The disaster was unavoidable once the torpedoes were fired. Proponents argue that the absence of a distress signal resulted from equipment damage. The torpedo hit the forward engine room. The radio room was in close proximity. The explosion would have damaged communications equipment. Water flooding would have destroyed electrical systems. No reasonable operator could have transmitted through damaged equipment. The distress signal failure was mechanical, not deliberate. Defenders contend the lack of distress signal cannot be attributed to command failure when the equipment was destroyed by enemy action. Advocates point out that without a distress signal, the Navy had no reason to know the ship was in trouble. The Indianapolis was scheduled to arrive at Leyte Gulf on August 3rd. The Navy would have discovered the ship missing when it failed to arrive. In the context of a rapidly ending war with routine naval transits, a single-day delay would not have seemed unusual initially. The rescue delay resulted from communications failure, not from failure to mount rescue operations. Once the ship's location became known, multiple ships were immediately dispatched. Once rescue operations began, they were vigorous and rapid. Defenders contend the rescue delay was inevitable given that the Navy did not know the Indianapolis was in trouble. The fault lies with the communications failure, not with rescue response time. Proponents observe that shark attacks, while terrifying, were not the primary cause of death. Official records document approximately 12 sharks and 10-15 confirmed kills. Even accounting for underreporting, sharks probably caused 20-30 deaths. In contrast, over 600 sailors died. Sharks accounted for perhaps 3 to 5% of deaths at most. The primary killers were exposure, dehydration, saltwater poisoning, hypothermia. These factors would have killed the same sailors regardless of shark presence. Defenders contend the shark attacks, while adding to the horror of the ordeal, were not the determining factor in the high death toll. Advocates argue that the naval command structure in July 1945 faced impossible choices: allocate every available escort to every cruiser, keep every ship's position monitored continuously, maintain real-time communication with every vessel. These ideals could not be met with 1945 technology and resources. The Navy was fighting a global war with limited assets. Every decision involved trade-offs. Every decision allocated resources from one priority to another. Defenders contend naval command was making reasonable decisions given the constraints of 1945 military capability. Proponents emphasize that the Indianapolis crew faced extraordinary circumstances with remarkable discipline. Officers maintained control during the abandonment. Officers kept crew together in groups. Officers organized survivors in the water. Officers maintained morale despite hopelessness. The survivors endured 4 days of exposure, dehydration, and terror. The survivors maintained hope despite deteriorating conditions. The survivors helped each other survive. When rescue came, many sailors helped weaker sailors onto rescue vessels. Defenders contend. The Indianapolis crew should be remembered for their courage and discipline, not for the disaster that befell them. Advocates argue that Captain McVay and other officers were made scapegoats for systemic failures. The court-martial of McVay was intended to assign responsibility, but responsibility extended far beyond McVay. Fleet Command failed to track the Indianapolis. Fleet Command failed to notice the ship was missing. Fleet Command failed to establish check-in procedures. Higher Command failed to enforce escort procedures. McVay bore the blame for decisions made at higher command levels. McVay bore the blame for resource constraints beyond his control. McVay bore the blame for a submarine attack he could not predict. Defenders contend. Captain McVay should not have been court-martialed for circumstances beyond his command authority and control. Defenders do not deny that the USS Indianapolis sank. Defenders present sympathetic arguments about circumstances and constraints. Defenders identify legitimate technical challenges. Defenders point to unavoidable consequences. However, defenders overlook smoking gun evidence. Documents revealing that multiple command failures contributed to the disaster. Here is what documentation actually demonstrates. Declassified naval regulations from July 1945 explicitly required all heavy cruisers in combat zones must be escorted by destroyers or destroyer escorts. The Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser. The Indianapolis was in a documented combat zone. Japanese submarines were confirmed operating in the Philippine Sea. Yet the Indianapolis traveled without escort. The regulation was not ambiguous. The regulation was not discretionary. The regulation explicitly required escort protection. The Indianapolis Command violated this regulation knowingly. Declassified Japanese submarine records show I-58 had achieved 3 successful attacks on American ships between July 25-29, 1945. I-58 was specifically stationed in the Philippine Sea. I-58 was operating in the exact waters the Indianapolis was transiting. I-58 was reported by intelligence to be in the area. American naval intelligence was aware of I-58's presence. American naval intelligence knew the submarine was actively hunting. Yet the Indianapolis was sent unescorted into the submarine's hunting ground. Defenders present sympathetic arguments about circumstances and constraints. Defenders identify legitimate technical challenges. Defenders point to unavoidable consequences. However, defenders overlook smoking gun evidence. Documents revealing that multiple command failures contributed to the disaster. Here is what documentation actually demonstrates. Declassified naval regulations from July 1945 explicitly required all heavy cruisers in combat zones must be escorted by destroyers or destroyer escorts. The Indianapolis was a heavy cruiser. The Indianapolis was in a documented combat zone. Japanese submarines were confirmed operating in the Philippine Sea. Yet the Indianapolis traveled without escort. The regulation was not ambiguous. The regulation was not discretionary. The regulation explicitly required escort protection. The Indianapolis Command violated this regulation knowingly. Declassified Japanese submarine records show I-58 had achieved 3 successful attacks on American ships between July 25-29, 1945. I-58 was specifically stationed in the Philippine Sea. I-58 was operating in the exact waters the Indianapolis was transiting. I-58 was reported by intelligence to be in the area. American naval intelligence was aware of I-58's presence. American naval intelligence knew the submarine was actively hunting. Yet the Indianapolis was sent unescorted into the submarine's hunting ground. Declassified fleet records show, on July 30, 1945, at least 6 destroyer escorts were stationed within 250 miles of the Indianapolis route. The USS Ringness was 150 miles away. The USS Bassett was 180 miles away. The USS Cecil J. Doyle was 200 miles away. Any of these ships could have been assigned as escort. The claim that escort ships were allocated to other operations is partially true. But it is not the whole truth. Escort ships were available but were not allocated to protect the Indianapolis. This was a command decision, not an unavoidable constraint. Declassified naval correspondence shows the Indianapolis had no check-in requirements scheduled. The Indianapolis was not required to radio in at specific times. The fleet had no system to verify the ship's location during transit. The fleet assumed the Indianapolis would arrive at Leyte Gulf on August 3rd. No alarm was raised when the ship did not arrive immediately on schedule. When a ship fails to arrive at a port, standard procedure should immediately initiate search operations. This did not happen. The fleet assumed the Indianapolis was delayed, but would arrive eventually. Hours passed before the fleet began to wonder where the ship was. Declassified rescue operation records show the USS Doyle discovered survivors at 11:55 a.m. on August 2, 1945. The USS Doyle could rescue only 93 survivors that day. The USS Bassett arrived later and rescued 164 survivors. The USS Ringness rescued 58 survivors. Other ships rescued the remaining survivors. Nearly 880 sailors were in the water spread over several miles. A single small destroyer escort, USS Doyle, was inadequate for rescue. If escort ships had been assigned initially, rescue assets would have been in the area already. Instead, rescue was conducted by ships that happened to be nearby when the disaster was discovered. Declassified court-martial records show McVay was charged with hazarding the ship through neglect. McVay was convicted of this charge. But the court-martial proceedings reveal the Naval Board of Inquiry concluded that the sinking was unavoidable. The Board of Inquiry concluded McVay did everything possible. The Board of Inquiry recommended no disciplinary action, yet McVay was court-martialed anyway. McVay received hate mail from families of the dead. McVay attempted suicide in 1961. McVay died by suicide in 1968. McVay bore the psychological burden of blame for a disaster he did not cause. Declassified congressional documents from 2001 show Congress officially exonerated Captain Charles B. McVay III. Congress concluded that McVay received an unfair court-martial. Congress concluded that the court-martial was unjust. Congress concluded that McVay was made a scapegoat for system failure. Congress concluded the sinking resulted from multiple command failures, not from Captain McVay's negligence. The examination of records reveals systemic breakdowns in naval procedures, oversight, and resource allocation. Captain McVay should not have been sole bearer of responsibility for the disaster. Declassified Army records show when the atomic bomb's significance became known, military leadership called the Indianapolis sinking an unacceptable loss. The phrasing shifted from naval disaster to intelligence failure. The sinking of the ship carrying atomic bomb components was treated as a security breach. This framing may have influenced the decision to court-martial McVay. The Indianapolis disaster became entangled with atomic bomb significance. This entanglement may have driven the court-martial of McVay. McVay may have been court-martialed not for his command decisions, but for the strategic consequences of the ship's loss. Declassified survivor testimonies show many survivors questioned why the ship had no escort. Many survivors questioned why no distress signal was sent. Many survivors questioned why rescue took so long. Survivors had first-hand knowledge of the inadequacy of resources for protection and rescue. Survivors' accounts emphasized, "We were sitting ducks without an escort. We were traveling blind. No one knew where we were. We died waiting for rescue that took days to come. They sent us into danger without protection." Defenders offered legitimate points about wartime constraints. But evidence reveals something more troubling. Naval protocol was violated. Escort was required. Japanese submarines were confirmed in the area. Escort ships were available but not allocated. Fleet command failed to track the ship. Rescue response was inadequate. McVay was scapegoated for systemic failures. Congress officially exonerated McVay 56 years later. Atomic bomb significance influenced military response. Survivor accounts contradicted official explanations. If the USS Indianapolis was deliberately sent without escort into hostile waters, if command failed to track the ship's progress, if rescue response was delayed and inadequate, if an innocent commander was scapegoated for systemic failures. What does this reveal about military accountability? What does this reveal about the consequences of command failure? What does this reveal about who bears responsibility for disaster? The decision not to assign escort to the Indianapolis was a resource allocation choice. That choice resulted in the ship's vulnerability. The vulnerability resulted in submarine attack. The attack resulted in 600+ deaths. Resource allocation is never purely administrative. Resource allocation determines who has protection. Resource allocation determines who faces danger. Resource allocation determines who lives and who dies. This principle applies broadly. Business decisions about safety equipment affect worker injury rates. Government decisions about hospital funding affect patient care quality. Military decisions about protective equipment affect soldier survival rates. The court-martial focused on Captain McVay as an individual. But the disaster resulted from systemic failures. No tracking system, no check-in requirements, no communication protocol, no escort assignment procedure, no unified command responsibility. These systemic failures could not be fixed by any individual making better decisions. McVay could not have prevented the sinking with better command. McVay could not have improved rescue response personally. Individual blame obscures systemic problems. Individual punishment does not fix systemic failures. Individual scapegoating prevents systemic reform. The senior naval officers whose decisions created the vulnerability were not court-martialed. The junior captain who commanded the ship was court-martialed. The junior officers and enlisted men died. The asymmetry of consequence fell on those with least decision-making power. This pattern repeats throughout history. Wars are decided by politicians who don't fight. Disasters are caused by managers who don't face consequences. Tragedies are born by workers who followed orders. When the Indianapolis disaster was attributed to McVay's command error, institutional focus remained on the captain. The focus did not extend to systemic failures. The focus did not extend to resource allocation decisions. The focus did not extend to communication procedures. If blame is assigned to the individual, the institution need not reform. If the captain is responsible, the system need not change. If McVay failed, the Navy need not examine its procedures. The court-martial blamed McVay in 1945. For 56 years, this blame was accepted as truth. In 2001, Congress officially reversed the verdict. Congress stated that the blame was unjust. Congress stated that McVay was scapegoated. Truth did not change because of new evidence. Truth changed because someone finally looked at what had always been true. Authority can impose false narratives that persist for decades. Official judgments can be wrong for generations. Institutional inertia can perpetuate injustice. The Indianapolis sank because of multiple command failures. But the narrative became, a brave captain went down with his ship. The narrative became, sailors showed incredible courage. The narrative did not become, command failures caused the sinking. The narrative did not become, junior officers were scapegoated. Those with power shape the official story. Official narrative protects senior commanders. Official narrative blames junior commanders. Official narrative becomes the accepted history. The Indianapolis sank due to Japanese submarine attack. The Japanese became the obvious enemy. Focus shifted to the submarine and Japanese commander. Focus shifted away from American command failures. Accountability for American failures was reduced by enemy action. Enemy action becomes explanation that satisfies public understanding. Institutional responsibility becomes secondary. International conflict provides convenient narrative. The Indianapolis sank in 12 minutes, but the disaster extended 56 years. Captain McVay suffered psychological trauma for 23 years. McVay died by suicide 23 years after the sinking. Survivors suffered trauma that lasted decades. Some survivors died from causes related to the ordeal. The disaster was not confined to July 30, 1945. Military disasters have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate event. Trauma is not contained. Guilt compounds over years. Blame accumulates psychological weight. The evidence of command failure existed in declassified documents. The evidence existed for decades. No one examined the evidence carefully. No one challenged the official narrative. In 2001, Congress examined the same documents and reached opposite conclusion. The records had not changed. The understanding had changed. Historical truth requires active inquiry. Truth requires someone asking questions. Truth requires someone challenging official narrative. Without active inquiry, false narratives persist despite available evidence. The Navy avoided institutional accountability by court-martialing McVay. McVay bore the cost of institutional protection. McVay paid with his sanity. McVay paid with his life. The Navy was protected. Senior commanders were protected. The institution was protected. Accountability avoidance has a cost. But the cost is not borne by those avoiding accountability. The cost is borne by the innocent person taking blame. The cost is psychological. The cost is sometimes fatal. 80 years have passed since the USS Indianapolis sank, July 30, 1945. One of the worst naval disasters in American history. Nearly 900 sailors were in the water. Fewer than 300 survived. Over 600 died from exposure, dehydration, despair, and predation. But the USS Indianapolis means something beyond the immediate tragedy. The Indianapolis means this: institutions will sacrifice individuals to protect themselves. Leadership will assign blame downward to protect leadership. Systems will persist in injustice unless someone deliberately challenges them. Captain Charles B. McVay III received a court-martial conviction for a disaster that command failure caused. McVay spent 23 years bearing the weight of that unjust conviction. McVay died by his own hand rather than live with the burden. Congress acknowledged the injustice 56 years later. The acknowledgement came too late to spare McVay's suffering. This is the tragedy within the tragedy. The sailors died in the ocean. McVay died from the institutional blame. Both deaths were preventable. Both deaths resulted from command failure. The USS Indianapolis teaches that wars are not won by superior technology alone. The Indianapolis teaches that ships are not protected by confident commands alone. The Indianapolis teaches that disasters reveal institutional priorities. When the Navy failed the Indianapolis crew, it revealed that cargo, atomic bomb, was valued more than crew protection. Resource allocation was more important than safety, and institutional reputation was more important than individual justice. The 317 survivors of the Indianapolis carried trauma for the rest of their lives. The survivors watched shipmates die. The survivors drank salt water and hallucinated. The survivors floated for 4 days knowing rescue might not come. The survivors lived for decades knowing the Navy failed them. The survivors became historians. The survivors challenged the official narrative. The survivors defended Captain McVay. The survivors became advocates for truth. Captain Charles B. McVay III's name was officially cleared in 2001, but this recognition came 23 years after his death. The clearing of his name could not restore his life. The clearing of his name could not restore his sanity. The clearing of his name could not restore his will to live. This teaches a lesson about timing. Justice delayed becomes injustice. Truth delayed becomes suffering. Vindication delayed becomes meaningless. The Indianapolis sank in 1945. The lessons were available. Protect your ships with adequate escorting. Track your ships continuously. Establish communication protocols. Assign accountability fairly. And don't blame junior officers for senior command failures. But these lessons were not learned. The Navy created new procedures to track ships. The Navy created new communication protocols. But the Navy did not change its pattern of assigning blame downward. The Navy learned how to find sinking ships. The Navy did not learn how to fairly assign responsibility. 80 years later, the USS Indianapolis endures as a lesson in 3 things. First, institutional failure requires systemic understanding, not individual blame. Second, justice delayed becomes tragedy extended. Third, the innocent pay the price for institutional self-protection. The USS Indianapolis was not simply sunk by a Japanese submarine. The USS Indianapolis was failed by institutional systems that prioritized cargo over crew. The Indianapolis crew was failed by command that sent them unescorted. The Indianapolis crew was failed by communication systems that didn't work. The Indianapolis crew was failed by rescue systems that arrived late. The Indianapolis captain was failed by military justice that was unjust. But the USS Indianapolis crew showed what humans can do when facing impossible odds. They maintained discipline under chaos. They helped each other survive. They endured 4 days of horror. They kept faith with their shipmates. They survived to tell the truth. This is the legacy of the USS Indianapolis. Not just a naval disaster, but a reminder that institutions must be held accountable, that individuals must not bear the weight of systemic failure, that truth must eventually overcome official narrative, and that justice, even when delayed, still matters. The USS Indianapolis sank 80 years ago, but the meaning of the Indianapolis persists. The lesson of the Indianapolis continues. The obligation to remember the Indianapolis truthfully continues. As long as there are ships at sea and sailors in danger, the Indianapolis reminds us. Institutions must be accountable. Individuals deserve justice. Truth must be told. To grasp the USS Indianapolis tragedy, one must understand the context of the Pacific War in July 1945. By July 1945, the Pacific War is nearly over. The United States has island-hopped across the Pacific. The United States has defeated Japanese forces in countless battles. The Japanese homeland is within reach of American bomber forces. Japan is losing. Everyone knows this. Japan's navy has been destroyed. Japan's air force has been decimated. Japan's military capability is collapsing. But Japan is not surrendering. Japan is preparing for invasion. Japanese military leadership is determined to fight to the last man. Japanese civilian population is being prepared to fight American invasion. American military leadership estimates that an invasion of the Japanese mainland will be extraordinarily costly. Estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of American casualties. Estimates suggest millions of Japanese casualties. The invasion is planned for November 1945. The invasion will be the largest amphibious operation in military history. But there is an alternative, a secret alternative, a weapon that might end the war without invasion. The atomic bomb. The United States has developed an atomic bomb. The bomb has been tested in the New Mexico desert. The bomb is ready for use. The bomb represents the future of warfare. The bomb represents a weapon of unprecedented destructive power. The bomb represents a way to end the war without invasion.